Okay, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Javier Martinez. I serve as Speaker of the House, and I represent District 11 in the New Mexico State House of Representatives out of Albuquerque. We are here to announce a couple of different proposals to rein in some of the abuses that we've seen at institutions of higher education. We firmly believe that the people of New Mexico deserve access to quality educational opportunities and to build strong careers here in this state. As public institutions, our state universities and colleges have a responsibility to uphold the highest standards of service and integrity. We owe it to the students at these institutions, to the taxpayers who help fund them, to make sure that their tax dollars are spent effectively and in service of the students, the faculty, and all of those who work at these public institutions. The legislation you'll hear about today will strengthen oversight and accountability of leadership at these institutions. We have a proposed constitutional amendment that will clearly define the responsibilities of university regents and will hold them accountable when they violate those responsibilities. Our university regents are entrusted with overseeing multi-million-dollar institutions and that impact thousands of students and employees, as well as the communities where these institutions reside. The constitutional amendment we will be proposing makes it clear that regents have a fiduciary duty to that institution, meaning that they must act responsibly, ethically, and in accordance with the law and university policies. When folks who represent these public institutions violate that public trust, they must face real consequences. This constitutional amendment will provide the state with strong and enforceable means of oversight, ensuring that regents who violate that responsibility can be held accountable and removed when necessary. Importantly, this amendment also contains strong guardrails. By removal actions may only be filed by the governor, the attorney general, or a majority of the school board's members, ensuring that this power is not misused for political purposes. Additionally, this amendment provides other tools to address misconduct that does not arise to the level of removal. Ultimately, this legislation is about maintaining the integrity of these institutions, strengthening the public trust in our higher education systems, and holding leaders accountable for fulfilling their responsibilities to students, faculty, and all of the workers and people of New Mexico. I urge my college to support this constitutional amendment and to help us hold leaders at these public institutions accountable so that the unconscionable abuses of public trust, like the one we saw at Western New Mexico University, never happen again.
Thank you and good afternoon. A Senate bill was introduced today. I didn't get the number down yet, but what it'll do is allow the Board of Finance has 30 days to approve or modify or reject the contract that's been sent to them by the Board of Regents. If a qualifying contract is not submitted, it's rejected and void. So they can't just hire somebody and say, we're not going to send that contract to the Board of Finance for approval. The Board of Finance can set criteria on top of that and additional rules for the contract and evaluation so that there's no golden parachute set in there that's too high. The contracts with excessive or severance liability have to be released and reviewed. The bill requires for prior approval from the Attorney General's office, and any contracting release of liability or indemnity clause which includes their total compensation that exceeds $200,000. The Board of Finance will have to approve that. In favor to do that will make it null and void. Annual reporting requirements, transparency is key as we move through this. We know what happened at not just Western, but at prior universities. There is a rumor about $1 million contract for lobbying. We don't know if it's true yet or not, but that came out of Western at the last minute. So transparency is very key in what's happening. Institutions must submit an annual report to the Attorney General detailing the current administration contracts, names, titles, and total compensation. The Board of Finance must also submit an annual report to the Attorney General outlining the contracts they've reviewed, the decisions they made, and the criteria used in evaluation. This piece of legislation is really about accountability in the students. We did free college tuition, and Western went ahead and did a tuition increase when we asked them not to. So on top of the new money that they should have gotten, the new students they should have got with free college, they went ahead and did that. Who knows where the money went? We'll have to figure that out with the auditor. But Mexicans and students deserve to know where their funding's going. that's being managed wisely, and that university leaders are making the decisions that are in the best interest of the students and the taxpayers. These reforms will close loopholes to prevent financial abuse, ensure our institutions operate with integrity, and that they were meant to uphold. So as we move forward in the session, I hope my colleagues will understand what we're trying to do, but we've got to get control of what's happening behind the scenes, behind the curtain in the higher ed universities. And then we don't even know what's happening with other money that's donated to the university. So with that, Mr. Attorney General.
So first, I want to thank the Speaker, Senator Munoz, and all the other legislative leaders for coming together and working with attorneys at the Department of Justice to come up with what I believe to be a balanced framework to bring much-needed oversight and accountability into the contracting process for the most senior leaders inside of our educational institutions. As you know, this action really gained a real sense of urgency when, on top of the misconduct that was under investigation in terms of the former president at Western New Mexico University, the Board of Regents at that institution made what I believe to be an unconscionable decision to award a golden parachute, which based on our calculations is nearly 60 times the total compensation of the lowest paid worker in that institution. And I think the Speaker and the Senator made an incredibly important point that we have to be stewards of taxpayer dollars, but we also have to be mindful about the sacrifices that families and students and others go through when they send their kids to public institutions. There's an expectation that their needs and interests come first. I don't know, but we intend to look into every aspect of Western New Mexico University in the course of our ongoing litigation. And one of the things that we hope to do by articulating these fiduciary duties in a constitutional amendment and providing for specific actionable authority to recover those funds, we're going to look at in depth at food insecurity, housing insecurity, the state of facilities in those institutions. And one of the things that I am really motivated by is trying to make sure that the people in those institutions who are in greatest need, that their needs and interests are placed first. Ahead of the special needs and interests of presidents, administrators, and others who have developed a close personal relationship with the governing board. And we also need to clarify fundamentally what their responsibility is. And their responsibility is to the taxpayers of New Mexico, but fundamentally the students who go to these institutions. I don't think any of us can justify, and I've found it very difficult for anyone to justify, the outlandish pay that was offered to somebody who was under and is still under a close examination both by the state auditor and the State Ethics Commission. That action, as I said, is ongoing, but this oversight and transparency is essential because it requires and provides for independent oversight. If someone is going to sign a package that is longer than 5 years or in excess of 10 times the lowest paid salaried member of that community, it automatically goes to the Board of Finance and has to be approved by the Board of Finance. If they include releases of liability or indemnification clauses of any kind, those have to be independently reviewed by our attorneys. Those two separate and powerful independent checks should bring an end to this kind of excessive compensation and give taxpayers in this state some peace of mind that the people that we entrust to care for their kids, to make sure they're educated, to provide for the resources, to have thriving world-class institutions, have their eye on the ball, and they're focused on the things that are the most important. And so, again, I'd like to thank the legislative sponsors and leaders who are assembled here today, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Hi, Joshua Bowling with Searchlight, New Mexico. In reading through this packet, I see a lot of talk about boards of regents and oversight with regard to those sorts of, who should be oversight officials, right? But I can't help but wonder about all of the university executives who were not in a position like that, whether they were vice presidents or even in the case of Western, a president's wife, who was not authorized to be spending this taxpayer money and did so anyway. So what are we doing to have oversight over that in the future?
Well, so the legislation that's going to be carried by Senator Munoz is going to deal with not just boards of regents, but senior level administrators that are clearly defined. And the bill goes through a pretty exhaustive definition of the senior leadership that would be covered by these actions. Unsurprisingly, we do not define the role that a spouse may have, because that is so outside the pale of what is lawful. That is something that's going to be more directly addressed through the ongoing litigation that we have in our current case.
Great, thanks.
Mylan Simonich, Santa Fe, New Mexican. Under your current powers, is there any potential to sue the 4 regents at Western New Mexico who resigned after the governor called for that on New Year's Eve?
So the way it works is whenever you sue an individual in their official capacity, once they've resigned, the newly appointed members step into the role as the defendants in that action, because we're bringing an action against them in their official capacity because they were exercising official authority in granting the pay package. So the Board of Regents at that institution will remain defendants, but legally they will be removed as individuals and replaced by the newly appointed individuals. That's just a function of how our legal system works when we're suing someone in their individual capacity.
Dan Boyd with the Albuquerque Journal. Just curious if you could explain why the Board of Finance was kind of the entity, I guess, suggested for this task, and wouldn't that be kind of giving more power to the executive branch, since the governor, basically controls the bulk of the Board of Finance?
Well, our sense was, and I'll let Senator Munoz speak to this, we felt that it was the appropriate place because they do have, or should have by their training, education, and experience, the ability to evaluate compensation packages of this type to make sure that it is in alignment with standard practices around the country. If you look at state government, there aren't as many other institutions that are as well equipped by their experience and their sort of orientation to evaluate whether or not this is a sound exercise of someone's fiduciary duty. It certainly could have been placed in other places. One of the other elements that we liked about it was the fact that it had several members, right? So it wasn't just one person. There's actually a board that has potentially, multiple voices and multiple perspectives on the propriety of a contract like that. But I'd ask Senator Munoz to comment.
The Board of Finance, that can get very tricky because the Board of Finance has the ability to approve bonds. So are they taking that bond money and switching it into operational money? Are they paying their outrageous salaries with that? Is that really legal? Is that not really legal? So as they look at those budgets and say, okay, well, they're asking for a bond, and where's it going to go and what's it going to do? Where's it really going, right? Is it going to the foundation? That's the thing we don't ever really get our eyes on, is what's paid out of the foundation. That's a deep look the press ought to really look into. The other thing, I'll give you an example for the guy from Searchlight. I mean, in Gallup, we had the guy that hunted Bigfoots still employed by UNM. The next president, who had a sexual harassment claim, is still employed by UNM. And do we really want to keep carrying that liability along with them as employees? And we look at the golden parachute, and now the same thing with the president of Western is now he's given a position. The liability was there before. The liability still exists as him as an employee. And so the Board of Finance can really kind of look into that and say, where's it coming from and how's it budgeted?
Daniel Chacon with the Santa Fe, New Mexican. The state auditor's report detailing the multiple instances of wasteful spending at Western New Mexico University came out in November, and the governor didn't call for the resignations until much later. Did the governor wait too long to call for those resignations?
Listen, I think where our focus is on trying to exercise the authority that we have to hold these folks accountable. I'll leave it to the governor to comment on whether she thought the timing was right. My sense is that we still have a long way to go to finish the underlying investigation. It was a letter of concern that was issued by the state auditor, but we're in communication with them. That investigation is ongoing, and now it's actually expanded to include the transactions at the heart of the severance payment itself. We also have a parallel investigation underway at the State Ethics Commission. My larger sort of objective in helping the legislature come up with a comprehensive solution is to clearly articulate the fiduciary duties, because these are common law duties at the heart of the action that we have already taken. And I think it was pretty revealing that in the defense against our emergency motion that we filed down in Silver City, the lawyer for Dr. Shepard effectively said they can do whatever they want. They, the Board of Regents, are free to do whatever they want without limitation. I think that's a complete misunderstanding of the common law principles that are clearly available to us in terms of vindicating the taxpayers' rights, but by placing clearly defined fiduciary responsibilities in the text of the Constitution itself, and giving the legislature additional power to modify how they manage and control institutions. That's also a component in the proposed constitutional amendment. Those things send a powerful and clear message of the types of expectations that we have for leaders inside those institutions in exercising their duties.
Rob Hoschel, KSFR Radio. Kind of a follow-up to the question that Dan asked. From scanning the Senate bill real quickly, it looked like the State Board of Finance is almost going to have another layer of oversight sort of between or simultaneous to the DOJ. I was wondering if there are any other agencies that were likely to be involved on an ongoing basis in terms of looking at these reports, or if there is sort of levels of oversight like the State Board of Finance reports up to DOJ or something along.
I'll turn it over to Senator Munoz.
I think the higher ed is the first one to approve their budget, so they'll be in the whole mix, right, as they move along and send their budgets and send out payments. So I think the higher ed department will have their eyes on that too.
And then just a quick follow-up, if I could, was there any other state that was a model for this legislation?
We looked at the governing principles not only with respect to higher education, but how fiduciary duties operate generally in our legal framework. I'll be honest, most of the case law that we have in this space is related to the fiduciary duties that a corporate board of directors owes to the shareholders. And that's a well-developed body of case law. We don't have the same type of development that you would see in the public space, but that's why we thought it was necessary. But there's no explicit reference to another state to articulate these duties. It actually comes from the corporate world where board members can be removed whenever they violate a fiduciary duty.
There's time for one more. Move it to Dan.
Of the $1.9 million, $683,000 has already been paid in federal taxes, $108,000 in state taxes. How would you get that back?
Well, Mylan, and it's a great question. The one thing that the court articulated in reaching the judgment is the idea that money is money and it's fungible. And so even though the person who's holding onto those funds has spent it on those taxes, he's still ultimately responsible. So if he loses a judgment, we have the same recourse that you would have against anybody else to recover those funds, and that includes the forced sale of potential assets to convert those assets into the same amount of money and recover it back for the taxpayer. So I know and I share your concern that the money's already been spent for some of those things. It's part of the reason we made the argument to the court that we wanted it held in trust. It's part of the reason we were so disappointed in Dr. Shepard that he wouldn't submit it to the court. That being said, if he loses this case, he should understand, and the taxpayers in this state should understand, we will look at every single asset that he has and do everything that we can to recover those funds at the conclusion of the case. Thank you very much.